his famous definition of what is man. Man is an animal who needs a master. And then he explains why. He says that there is a kind of, he uses the term which is usually translated as unruliness, a kind of wild, irrational excess of violent freedom in man, which animals don't have. This is why animals don't need education. So Kant is here very precise. He's not saying that it's the nature in man which has to be educated. It's precisely, let's call it a nature turned against itself, an excess of wild freedom, and maybe this is what animals see in ourselves. I mean, you know, this is always the question to ask if you want to be good Hegelians, and I am. For example, instead of asking, do Christians treat properly Judaism? And then you get these rather boring debates of usually defending Judaism in the sense of, oh, Christian notion of love misses the point, anxiety of God in Judaism. A much more interesting question is, what were the first Christians in the eyes of the Jewish establishment? What monsters they were? What monstrous excess this was? Always, this is the question to be asked. We have a similar example. Do you remember some 3 years ago, I think, some explorers deep in Argentinian jungle it was reproduced in all media, a photo of some tribe which was not yet touched by our so-called civilization. It was the first contact. And you see in color those frightened faces looking us. We see our monstrosity there. So we have to be aware of this dimension. But again, where is this monstrosity? Now I come to the crucial part. I think that the next step is to locate properly our monstrosity, which is not the simple egotistic violence and so on, whatever, but a more systemic one. What do I mean by this? When, in his Christmas message on December 2008, the Pope said that if humanity did not learn to overcome its egotism, human history would end in self-destruction, he not only stated a moralistic platitude, but also uttered a clear lie, falsity. Let us accept that the two principal dangers today are unbridled capitalism and religious fundamentalism. But as an even superficial analysis of fundamentalist subjectivity makes it clear, so-called fundamentalists are not egotists, but quite on the contrary, ruthlessly dedicated to a transcendent goal, ready to sacrifice everything, their lives included, for it. As for capitalism, one could also show that its overexpanding circulation cannot be reduced to the capitalist's egotistic striving for more and more profit. A parallel of the structure of the capital with Dawkins' notion of mem, you know, like based on gene, mem, can be of some help here. A mem, unit of memory, spreads neither because of its actual beneficial effects upon its bearers, say, those who adopt a mem in some intellectual idea unit are more successful in life and thus gain an upper hand in the struggle for survival, nor because of its characteristics which make it subjectively attractive to its bearers. Like a computer virus, the mem proliferates simply by programming its own retransmission. What is so unsettling about this notion is that we humans, endowed with minds, wills, and an experience of meaning, are nonetheless unwitting victims of a thought contagion which operates blindly, spreading itself like a computer virus. No wonder that when talking about mem, Daniel Dennett regularly resorts to the same metaphors as Lacan apropos language. In both cases, we are dealing with a parasite which penetrates and occupies the human individual, using it for its own purposes. And indeed, thus memetics not rediscover the notion of a specific symbolic level which operates outside the standard couple of objective biological facts and subjective experience. In a liminal case, an idea can spread, even if in the long term it brings only destruction to its bearers and is even experienced as unattractive. So where is here the parallel with capital? In the same way that mem, misperceived by us subjects as means of our communication, effectively run the show, they use us to reproduce and multiply themselves, the productive forces which appear to us as means to satisfy our needs and desires effectively run things. The true aim of the capitalist process of production is the development of productive forces, and the satisfaction of our needs is effectively just the means for the development of productive forces. Consequently, one should not say that capitalism is sustained by the selfish greed of individual capitalists for more power and health. This greed itself is subordinated to the impersonal striving of capital to reproduce and to expand. One is thus almost tempted to say that what we really need is more, not less, egotism. Take the ecological threat. No pseudo-animistic love for nature is needed to act here. Just a long-term egotistic interest. In Lacanian terms, one can determine the distinction between individual greed and this striving of capital to reproduce and to expand as the difference of desire and drive. Apropos the financial breakdown of 2008, Paul Krugman made a very nice observation. I quote him. If we could spin a time machine back to 2004 so that people could ask themselves whether to exercise caution or to follow the herd, most of them would still follow the herd, in spite of knowing that there will be a breakdown. End of quote. This, I think, is crucial for this mimetic, automatic functioning of ideology today. The irrationality of capitalist rationalism, the counterproductivity of capitalist productivism are known for a long time. They were analyzed in detail by Frankfurt School and many others. But when the same topic is resuscitated today, it is not just in order to return to the past. Today, we are able to add a crucial reflexive twist. Let me quote from a work by French theorist of rationality Jean-Pierre Dupuy. Quote, "What is new and different today is precisely the fact that 30 years later, we know that the knowledge we already possessed was in no way sufficient to make us change our behavior. This fact is not a minor detail. It constitutes a key element of the problem. In 1960-70, it was more simple to believe that another world is possible. This is why these years continue to inspire so much nostalgia. At this epoch, one could still imagine that the warnings based on the present situation could influence in a positive way the future. Today, we know it. The future is not what it was." End of quote. Therein resides the lesson of the failure of the traditional critique of ideology. Knowing is not enough. One can know what one is doing and still do it. The reason is that such knowledge operates under the conditions of fetishist disavowal. One knows, but one doesn't really believe what one knows. So the problem is how to make this knowledge operative. Or, to put it in another way, there is no lack of anti-capitalism today. We are even witnessing an overload of the critique of the horrors of capitalism. Books, newspapers, in-depth investigations, TV reports abound on companies ruthlessly polluting our environment, on corrupted bankers who continue to get fat bonuses while their banks have to be saved by public money, of sweatshops where children work overtime, and so on and so on. There is, however, a catch to all this overflow of critique. What is, as a rule, not questioned is, in this critique, ruthless as it may appear, is the democratic liberal frame of fighting against excesses. The explicit or implicit goal is to democratize capitalism, to extend the democratic control onto economy through the pressure of the public media, parliamentary inquiries, harsher laws, and so on, but never to question the institutional frame of the state of law. This remains the sacred cow even for the most radical forms of this kind of ethical anti-capitalism like the Porto Alegre, Seattle movement, and so on. It is here, I think, that Marx's key insight remains valid, today perhaps more than ever. For Marx, the question of freedom is not located primarily into the political sphere proper. Does the country have free elections? Are the judges independent? Is the press free from hidden pressures? Are human rights respected? And similar list of questions different independent and not so independent Western institutions apply when they want to pronounce a judgment on a country. The key to freedom for Marx is in the apolitical network of social relations, from market to family, where the change needed if we want an actual improvement is not just a political reform, but a change in social relations which appear apolitical, which means a change which cannot be done through democratic political procedures, elections, and in the narrow sense of the term. We do not vote who owns what. We do not vote about relations in a factory. All this is left to processes outside the narrow sphere of the political. Radical changes in this domain should be made outside the legal sphere. And again, I think this is the tragic limitation we have to overcome. This limitation of the legal democratic approach was clearly visible in the case of the recent Bay of Mexico oil spill here in the States. What was unfortunately ridiculous in President Obama's, whom I still deeply respect, reaction was the idea that a private company, no matter how rich, can pay for the damage of a serious ecological catastrophe which reaches even over the US population and potentially shatters the fundaments of our way of life. The search for the guilty agent who should be made legally responsible for the damage is part of our legalistic frame of mind. People can and do sue fast food chains as responsible for their obesity. Ideas circulate about slavery reparations, arguing that compensation is long overdue, and so on. What is fundamentally wrong with this logic is not that it's too radical, but that it's not radical enough. The true task is not to get compensation from those responsible, but to change the situation so that they will no longer be in a position to cause damage or push towards this kind of activity which causes damage. I think this is what was lacking in Obama's reaction. You know, all these rhetorics, I will kick British Petroleum in the ass and I will make them pay. Sorry, but when we are talking about such a catastrophe, it reaches beyond this logic. It's ridiculous for me to talk about paying. The first thing to note is that, my God, even if maybe, I don't know, BP was a little bit worse than other companies, but it could have happened probably to another company. So the problem is not British Petroleum. The problem is a more global, general one, and which, again, compels us to ask fundamental questions about our way of life and so on and so on. And that's our situation today. Risks are exploding everywhere, and we rely